My son told me to leave my grandson's baptism right there in the church, in front of God and everyone watching. So I smiled, walked out, and made one phone call that shattered their picture-perfect little family. 3 days later, Vanessa was in handcuffs. David was on his knees, begging me to come back. But by then, it was already too late. Drop your city in the comments and hit subscribe. Ready for an unforgettable story? Let me tell you how a grandmother's broken heart turned into the sweetest revenge you'll ever hear. 6 months ago, I truly believed I had the perfect family. My son David had married Vanessa, a beautiful young woman who seemed to adore him. When their baby, Jacob, was born, I was over the moon. A grandson, someone to shower with love, attention, and every bit of affection a grandmother has to give. But I've learned that perfect is often just a carefully built lie. It started the way these things usually do, small enough to ignore. Vanessa would make quiet remarks about my cooking being too heavy for David. She suggested I should call before stopping by because they might be busy. She posted glowing family photos online, smiling and polished. And somehow, I was never in a single one. When I brought it up to David, he just shrugged. You know how young mothers are, Mom, just give her time. So I did. 6 months of walking on eggshells, bringing store-bought cookies instead of my homemade ones, calling 3 times before visiting, pretending not to notice how my daughter-in-law's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. The breaking point came when Jacob's baptism was being planned. I offered to help with the reception, maybe bake my famous apple pie, the one David had loved since he was a little boy. Vanessa shut it down immediately. Oh, that's sweet, she said coolly, but we're keeping it simple. Professional catering only, professional catering. For a baptism reception in a church fellowship hall, I should have seen it then. I should have realized that a woman willing to replace her mother-in-law's apple pie with catered desserts was capable of far worse. But love has a way of making you foolish, especially when it comes to family. The night before the baptism, I ironed my best navy dress, the one Robert always said made my eyes shine. I polished my grandmother's pearls. I practiced holding Jacob just right for the photos. I'd bought him a beautiful silver baby cup from Tiffany's, engraved with his initials and the date. I even wrote a short speech, just in case family members were asked to share a blessing or a memory. What a fool I was. The morning of the baptism dawned bright and clear. I arrived at First Methodist 15 minutes early, gift in hand. Wearing my proudest grandmother's smile, the church was simply but beautifully decorated. White roses, baby's breath, soft light streaming through the windows. Friends and family filled the pews, dressed in their Sunday best. I spotted David near the altar, handsome in his charcoal suit, holding my grandson like fatherhood was written into his bones. My heart swelled with pride and love so strong that for a moment, I forgot about all the tension of the past months. David, sweetheart, I said softly as I approached with the gift. That's when I saw Vanessa. She stood near the baptismal font in a flowing cream dress, looking like she'd stepped straight out of a magazine. But the second she saw me walking toward them, her serene expression hardened into fury. She leaned in and whispered something sharp in David's ear, her manicured fingers gripping his arm until her knuckles turned white. I watched my son's face change. He looked between his wife and me, the face of a man trapped between two fires. Mom, he said quietly when I reached them, refusing to meet my eyes. We need to talk. The gift box suddenly felt unbearably heavy in my hands. Around us, the church buzzed with gentle conversation and laughter. Someone tested the microphone. The organist warmed up with a soft hymn. I saw my sister Martha settle into a front pew, saving me a seat. Everything looked normal, festive, perfect. Except for the storm gathering in my son's eyes. What's wrong, honey? I asked, even as a cold weight spread through my chest. David glanced at Vanessa. She gave him a small, sharp nod, the kind that said, do it now or else. Mom, he whispered, barely audible. Vanessa thinks we think it might be better if you didn't stay for the ceremony. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, life went on. The church hummed. The hymn floated through the air. And in that moment, my heart broke quietly. Completely right there in God's house, life kept moving as if nothing had changed, while my own world tilted sharply on its side. I don't understand, I said, though a part of me understood all too well. David hesitated, struggling for words, then glanced at his wife like he needed her approval. It's just, you've been difficult lately. The word difficult rang in my ears like a funeral bell. The comments about the catering, he continued, showing up unannounced last week. The way you keep criticizing Vanessa's choices, difficult. 6 months of biting my tongue, 6 months of walking on eggshells, 6 months of swallowing my pride, and I was the problem. David, I said carefully, forcing my voice to stay steady. I bought him a christening gift. I'm his grandmother, I know, he replied, not meeting my eyes. But Vanessa feels uncomfortable. And this is supposed to be a peaceful, spiritual moment for our family. Not the family that included me, but their family. One I clearly no longer belonged to. The church seemed to go quiet all at once, as if the room itself sensed what was happening. I felt eyes turning toward us, heard whispers starting to ripple through the pews. My sister Martha looked alarmed, halfway rising from her seat. That was when Vanessa stepped forward. Her voice carried just far enough for nearby guests to hear. "Margaret, I hope you understand. This is Jacob's special day, and we just want everything to be perfect and peaceful. Maybe it's best if you take some time. As if I were unstable. As if I were having some sort of episode rather than being humiliated in public by my own family." The gift box slipped from my numb fingers and hit the floor with a hollow thud. The sound echoed through the now silent church. I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something. To defend me. To remember that I was his mother. And that I deserved better than this. He didn't. He just stood there, holding my grandson, refusing to meet my eyes. That was the moment something inside me died and something else was born. I bent down and picked up the fallen gift box. My hand steadied despite the earthquake tearing through my chest. When I straightened, I looked directly at my son and said the words that would haunt him for weeks. "Of course, dear. I understand perfectly." The relief on Vanessa's face was so obvious it was almost laughable. She actually smiled, convinced she'd won. David looked startled by my calm, maybe even disappointed. Had he wanted a scene? Some emotional outburst to justify what they were doing? "Sorry to disappoint. I'd been raised better than that. I'll just say goodbye to Jacob," I said gently, reaching out. Vanessa hesitated. For a moment, I could see her calculating whether this was some kind of trick. But too many eyes were watching. She couldn't deny a grandmother one last kiss without looking like a monster. She gave a stiff nod. I took Jacob into my arms, feeling his warm little body against my chest. He was perfect, his father's dark hair, those striking blue eyes that looked like they could see straight into your soul. He gurgled softly and grabbed at my pearls with curious fingers. "Goodbye, my sweet boy," I whispered into his hair. "Grandma loves you more than words can ever say." I handed him back to David, picked up the gift box, and walked out of First Methodist Church with my head held high, while my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But here's what they didn't know. What they couldn't have known. As they watched me walk away. I'd been expecting this moment for weeks, you see. Being dismissed and underestimated has its advantages. Once people decide you don't matter, they stop paying attention. They forget you have eyes and ears, and a mind that's been watching, listening, and quietly fitting the pieces together. I'd known Vanessa was trouble from the day David brought her home 3 years ago. She was 28, then beautiful in that polished, calculated way that comes from expensive salons and personal trainers. She laughed at all of David's jokes, praised his cooking, and acted completely smitten. I wanted to like her. I truly did, but there were little things, the way she'd answered David's phone when I called, claiming he was in the shower or buried in work. How she redirected conversations whenever I asked about her family or her past. The designer clothes and jewelry that seemed far beyond what a dental hygienist should be able to afford, even with David's solid salary as an accountant. I'm not stupid. And I'm certainly not naive. I've lived long enough to recognize when something doesn't add up. So I started paying attention. At first, it seemed harmless. Things I noticed during visits. Credit card statements left on the kitchen counter, charges to places David swore they'd never been. Phone calls Vanessa took in another room, her voice low and urgent, and slowly, piece by piece, the picture began to form. I'd noticed a faint wedding ring tan line on her finger, slightly wider than the band she wore as David's wife. Then there was the afternoon I decided to surprise them with lunch and found a man leaving their house at 11 in the morning. He was tall, well-dressed, driving a Mercedes with California plates. When I asked David about it later, he looked genuinely confused. "What man?" he said. Vanessa didn't mention anyone stopping by. That was the moment I decided to do something Robert would have laughed at me for. I hired a private investigator. James Morrison was a retired police detective who specialized in background checks and domestic cases. He came highly recommended by my neighbor's daughter, who'd used him during her own ugly divorce. Professional, discreet, thorough. I feel silly, I told him during our first meeting at a downtown coffee shop. Like some paranoid old woman who watches too much television. James smiled kindly. "Mrs. Thompson, in my 30 years of police work, I learned that a grandmother's intuition is usually more accurate than a lie detector test. What, exactly, concerns you?" So I told him everything, the inconsistencies, the expensive lifestyle, the mysterious visitor, the way Vanessa seemed to have no past before David. James listened without judgment. jotting notes in small, precise handwriting. "I'll need about 2 weeks," he said. "Maybe less if she's as careless as she sounds." She was careless. Incredibly arrogantly careless. Within 10 days, James uncovered what I'd suspected but prayed wasn't true. Vanessa Maria Santos was already married. She had been for 4 years to a man named Carlos Santos in San Diego. Not only was my son living with a bigamist, but his wife was systematically stealing from him. The bank records James obtained showed regular transfers from David's accounts to a bank in California, $1,500 every single month for the past 2 years. When David had questioned her about the money, Vanessa told him it was for her sick mother's medical bills. Her mother, who, according to James's research, was perfectly healthy and living comfortably in a paid-off house in San Diego, a house funded, in part, by her daughter's marriage scam. But the real shock, the piece of information that made my blood run cold, was this. Vanessa wasn't just a bigamist and a thief, she was also a kidnapper. Baby Jacob wasn't David's son. According to a birth certificate James obtained from California records, Jacob Santos had been born 6 months earlier to Vanessa Santos and her legal husband, Carlos. The birth certificate David had signed was a forgery. The baby he'd been raising as his own son was, legally speaking, a missing child. Carlos Santos had been searching for his wife and baby for 3 months ever since Vanessa vanished with Jacob and $30,000 from their joint bank account. So as I walked out of that church, the gift box tucked under my arm and my dignity intact, I wasn't empty-handed. In my purse was James Morrison's full investigative report and Carlos Santos's phone number. David wanted me gone. Fine. But he was about to learn that some phone calls change everything. I got into my car, drove 2 blocks to the grocery store parking lot, and pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Funny how clarity can calm even the most shattered heart. The phone rang 3 times before a man answered. "Hello, Mr. Santos," I said. "My name is Margaret Thompson. I believe I know where your wife and son are." The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Carlos Santos spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Barely holding together. "Jacob?" he asked. "You know where Jacob is?" "Yes," I said, watching churchgoers file out of First Methodists in the distance. The baptism ceremony was probably beginning right about now. "And I know where your wife is, too." "Oh God," he whispered. "Thank God. Are they? Is my son okay?" The pain in his voice tightened my chest. This man had been living the same nightmare. I was only just beginning to understand having a child stolen by someone he trusted. "He's safe," I assured him. "Healthy, well cared for." "But Mr. Santos, there are things you need to know," and I told him everything. About David, about the false marriage, about how Vanessa had been living as Vanessa Thompson for nearly 3 years, about how she convinced my son that Jacob was his child, about the money, $1,500 a month for 2 years supposedly for medical bills, $1,500 a month. Carlos repeated, his voice turning hard. "She drained our savings and maxed out our credit cards before she disappeared. I've been wondering how she managed to survive." "Your son was baptized today," I continued, "at First Methodist Church in Millbrook. They're probably in the middle of the ceremony right now. There will be a reception afterward in the church fellowship hall." "I'm in San Diego," Carlos said quickly. "I can catch the next flight." "But Mr. Santos," I interrupted gently, "before you do anything, you need to call the police. What your wife has done isn't just bigamy or theft. It's kidnapping. You need everything properly documented." There was another pause. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "Why are you helping me?" I looked toward the church, where my family was celebrating without me. "I'm Jacob's grandmother," I said. "Or at least, I thought I was. Your wife destroyed my family, stole from my son, and broke more hearts than just yours. But most of all, I'm calling because that little boy deserves to be with his real father." "Thank you," Carlos whispered. "I don't know how to thank you. Just get your son back," I said. After I ended the call, I sat in my car for a long time, watching people come and go from the grocery store. Ordinary people doing ordinary things on a Sunday afternoon, buying groceries, picking up flowers, living normal, unbroken lives. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister Martha. "Where did you go?" everyone's asking. I turned off my phone without replying, let them wonder. On the drive home, I passed the church one more time. Cars still filled the parking lot. People in their Sunday clothes stood outside, chatting in the spring sunshine. Through the stained glass windows, I glimpsed white robes and heard the faint echo of organ music. Jacob's baptism was happening right then. My grandson, except he wasn't really my grandson, was being dedicated to God while his real father sat in California, desperately booking a flight to reclaim his stolen child. By tomorrow, everything would be different. By tomorrow, David would understand what it feels like to have your family ripped away by someone you trusted. But first, I had one more phone call to make at home. I sat in Robert's old chair and dialed the Millbrook Police Department. I need to report a kidnapping, I told the dispatcher 2 hours later. Detective Linda Hayes sat across from me in my living room, a small digital recorder resting on the coffee table between us. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense presence. That reminded me of my daughter's old soccer coach, Mrs. Thompson, she said. I want to be sure I understand this correctly. You're telling me your son's wife has been living under a false identity for 3 years, that she's legally married to another man in California, and that the child your son believes is his biological son was actually kidnapped from her husband. That's correct. And you learned all of this through a private investigator you hired? Yes, I handed her James Morrison's full report. Everything is documented. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, bank records, photographs. Detective Hayes flipped through the pages, her expression growing more serious with each one. This is substantial, she said finally. If it's true, we're looking at multiple felonies: bigamy, identity theft, grand theft, kidnapping. It's true, I said. The child is currently at First Methodist Church. I glanced at my watch. The baptism should be over by now. They're probably at the reception. She looked up. Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask, why didn't you come forward earlier? If you suspected something was wrong months ago? It was a fair question because until today, I said slowly, I hoped I was wrong. I kept hoping there was some explanation that wouldn't destroy my son's life. I paused, feeling the weight of my honesty, and because I was a coward. I didn't want to be the one to break his heart. Detective Hayes waited, but something changed today. I continued. She had me thrown out of my grandson's baptism, forced my son to choose between his wife and his mother, and he chose her. That's when I stopped protecting the people who were hurting both me and that innocent baby. Detective Hayes nodded. We'll need to coordinate with the San Diego Police Department and the FBI. This crosses state lines. The child's father is flying in tonight. He should be, I said. This is going to be complicated. She added gently. Mrs. Thompson, your son is going to feel like his entire life has been a lie. It has been. She stood, slipping the report into her briefcase. We'll start by questioning Vanessa Santos. Is there any reason you think she might run if she suspects we're closing in? I thought of Vanessa's smug smile as she watched me leave the church. No, I said calmly. She thinks she's already won. She thinks she's convinced everyone that I'm just a bitter, jealous mother-in-law stirring up trouble. She has no idea that anyone knows the truth. Good. That gives us the advantage. After Detective Hayes left, I called James Morrison to thank him for his thorough work. Then I poured myself a glass of Robert's good wine, the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on the back porch, watching the sun sink behind the oak trees. Tomorrow would bring chaos, pain, and more heartbreak than any family should ever have to endure. David would hate me, at least at first. He'd feel betrayed, humiliated, and shattered. The woman he loved and trusted had used him in the cruelest way imaginable. But that night, for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. I kept my phone off until the next morning. When I finally turned it on, there were 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, most of them from David, growing more frantic as the hours passed. Mom, where are you? People are asking about you. Seriously, call me back. Mom, this isn't funny. Something's wrong. Please call. I'm coming over. The last message was from 3 hours earlier. I looked out the front window and saw David's car parked in my driveway. He was sitting on my porch steps, still wearing yesterday's suit, looking like he'd slept in it. His hair was disheveled, his tie was gone, and his face had the hollow, shell-shocked look of a man whose world had completely collapsed. Mom, he said when he saw me, his voice breaking. Thank God. Where have you been? Why didn't you answer your phone? I really looked at my son then, and I saw exhaustion, confusion, and something I hadn't seen in months, remorse. I turned my phone off. I said simply, would you like some coffee? He followed me into the kitchen, moving like someone walking through a minefield. Everything about him told me Detective Hayes had already paid them a visit the night before. Mom, he said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, added cream to mine, and sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework 20 years ago, where I'd listened to him rehearse school presentations, where I'd celebrated his graduation, his promotions, and what I once believed was his engagement to a wonderful woman. I said. Did you call the police on Vanessa? I reported a crime, I answered. Yes. His hands trembled as he lifted his mug. They arrested her last night right in front of everyone at the church reception. Federal agents, Mom, to FBI. They put my wife in handcuffs in front of my friends, my coworkers. Everyone, she's not your wife. David, don't, he said sharply, his voice cracking. Just don't, not yet. I waited while he struggled for words. Watching the strong man I'd raised unravel piece by piece, they showed me documents. He said finally. A marriage certificate from San Diego, a birth certificate with different names. Bank records showing money being sent to California. They say she's been stealing from me for 2 years. She has been, and Jacob? His voice broke completely. They say Jacob isn't mine. They say his real father is flying in from California to take him home. I reached across the table and took his hand, surprised when he didn't pull away. I'm so sorry. Sweetheart. I'm so sorry. How long have you known? I suspected for months. I hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago. I got proof last Thursday. He stared at me, trying to process it. You knew when you came to the baptism yesterday? You knew she wasn't really my wife. That Jacob wasn't really my son. And you still came? I came because I love you, I said softly. Because I wanted to see my grandson one last time before. I stopped myself. Before what? He asked. Before you learned the truth, I said gently. And lost him forever. Silence filled the space between us, heavy with everything that had been destroyed in a single day. Finally, David spoke again. She made me ask you to leave. I didn't want to, but she said if I didn't support her, she'd take Jacob and move back to California. She said you were trying to undermine our marriage, that you were jealous of our happiness. And you believed her. I loved her, he said, his voice breaking. Mom, I thought she loved me. I thought Jacob was my son. He looked up at me, eyes full of pain and shame. When you walked out of that church, do you know what I felt? I waited. Relief, he whispered. Relief that the drama was finally over, that Vanessa would be happy, that we could finally have a peaceful family celebration. The honesty in his confession hurt more than yesterday's public humiliation ever had. And now, he continued quietly, now I feel like the biggest fool who ever lived. Now I understand why you were asking questions about her past. Why you were worried about her expensive clothes and jewelry. You weren't being nosy or jealous. You were trying to protect me. I squeezed his hand. I was trying to protect all of us. He swallowed hard. The man flying in from California, Jacob's real father, what's he like? I thought back to my brief phone call with Carlos Santos, the desperation and raw love in his voice. He's heartbroken, I said softly. He's been searching for his son for 3 months. According to the investigator, he filed missing person reports, hired his own private detective, and spent his life savings trying to find them. Does he know about me? David asked. That I thought Jacob was mine? He knows, I said. And David, he's grateful you took care of his son. He doesn't blame you. You're as much a victim in this as he is. David buried his face in his hands. I have to give him back, don't I? He whispered. I have to hand Jacob to a complete stranger and pretend the last 6 months never happened. He's not a stranger, sweetheart, I said gently. He's Jacob's father. The doorbell rang. Cutting through the moment, through the front window, I saw a police car in the driveway and Detective Hayes walking up the steps beside a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dark-haired, and moved with the restless energy of someone running on nothing but adrenaline and desperation. Even from a distance, I could see Jacob's eyes in his face. That's him, David said quietly. That's Jacob's real father. I opened the door to find Detective Hayes standing beside Carlos Santos, who looked like he hadn't slept in days, held together by hope alone. Mrs. Thompson. Detective Hayes said, this is Carlos Santos. He's here to reclaim his son. Carlos stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Thompson, I can't thank you enough. You saved my boy. Where is Jacob? Protective custody, Detective Hayes answered. We took him into care last night while sorting out the legal issues. Mr. Santos has provided DNA evidence confirming paternity, along with the original birth certificate and medical records. Carlos's hands were shaking. Can I see him? It's been 3 months since she took him. I need to see him, of course. Detective Hayes turned to David. Mr. Thompson, would you like to come with us? We understand this is difficult for you as well. David stood slowly, suddenly looking every one of his 34 years and then some. Will you come with me, Mom? I looked at my son, broken, grieving. The same man who'd chosen his wife over his mother just 24 hours earlier. The same man about to lose the child he believed was his own flesh and blood. Despite everything, the humiliation, the months of being dismissed, he was still my baby, of course. I said, of course I will. An hour later, we stood inside a Child Protective Services office, watching Carlos Santos hold his son for the first time in 3 months. Jacob recognized his father instantly, reaching for him with a delighted gurgle that brought tears to everyone's eyes except David's. David stood frozen, watching the baby he'd loved for 6 months bond with the man who was truly his father. I wanted to comfort him, But some pain is too deep for comfort, too vast for words. He's grown so much, Carlos whispered, kissing Jacob's head. Then he turned to David. Thank you. Thank you for taking care of him. I know this wasn't your fault. David nodded stiffly. He's a good baby, he said quietly. He sleeps through the night now. He likes those little puffs, the sweet potato ones. He's starting to sit up on his own. Carlos hesitated. Would you mind telling me more about what he's been like? I've missed so much, and there, inside that sterile government office, my son spent an hour telling a stranger about the daily life of a baby he'd loved as his own. First smiles, favorite toys, bedtime routines, the way Jacob liked to grab at shadows on the wall. Carlos listened to every word, occasionally asking gentle questions, treasuring each detail of the months stolen from him. By the time they finished, both men were crying. When we finally left Child Protective Services, Carlos Santos had his son back, and David was left with nothing but an empty car seat and a lifetime of questions about what had ever been real. Mom, David said as we stood in the parking lot. I owe you an apology, David said. For yesterday. For the last 6 months. For not trusting your instincts about Vanessa. You don't owe me anything, I replied gently. Except honesty. Going forward. No, he insisted. I do owe you something. I owe you respect. I owe you gratitude. And I owe you recognition that you were protecting me even when I was too blind to see it. Then he hugged me, really hugged me for the first time since Vanessa had entered our lives. What happens now? He asked. Now we heal, I said. Now we rebuild. Now we remember what family really means. But as we drove home separately, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. 3 weeks later, I was frosting a birthday cake in my kitchen when the phone rang. David's name appeared on the caller ID, which had become a welcome sight again since Vanessa's arrest. Hey, sweetheart, I answered. How are you holding up? That's actually why I'm calling, he said. His voice sounded stronger than it had in weeks, more like the confident man I'd raised. I wanted to thank you again, and I wanted to tell you something important. I set down my spatula and gave him my full attention. What is it? I've been going to therapy, Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She specializes in relationship trauma and family recovery, and Mom, she helped me understand something you need to hear. What's that? You didn't just save me from Vanessa, he said. You showed me what real love looks like. My throat tightened. David, let me finish, he said softly. When Vanessa demanded I choose between you and her, I chose wrong. I chose the person who was manipulating me over the person who had loved me unconditionally my entire life. He paused. And when you found out the truth, you could have handled it quietly. You could have let me figure it out on my own or walked away from the whole mess. I stirred the frosting slowly, remembering the dark moments when I'd considered doing exactly that. Instead, he continued. You made the hard choice. The one that hurt in the short term but protected everyone in the long term. You called Carlos Santos knowing it would destroy what I thought was my family. But you did it because Jacob deserved his real father and I deserved the truth. I did it because I love you both, I said quietly. That's exactly what Dr. Martinez said. David replied. She said what you did was an act of profound love even though it looked like betrayal. From my perspective, she called it tough love with consequences. I smiled. Sounds like a smart therapist. She is, he agreed. And she's helped me realize something else. I want to make things right between us. Truly right. Not just apologize and move on but rebuild our relationship on honest ground. I'd like that very much. Good, he said, because I have a proposal. Are you free Saturday afternoon? I think I can manage that, I said. What did you have in mind? Carlos Santos called me yesterday. He wants to meet with both of us. He's driving up from San Diego with Jacob. And he asked if we'd like to spend some time together, really get to know each other. I nearly dropped the phone. He wants to see us again? Mom, David said gently, he considers you Jacob's grandmother. Not biologically but emotionally. You were there for Jacob's first 6 months. You held him, loved him, bought him gifts. Carlos doesn't want that connection to disappear just because the truth came out. Tears spilled before I could stop them. I'd tried so hard not to think about Jacob, to ignore how much I missed his tiny fingers grabbing my pearls, the way he settled into my arms like he belonged there. And me? I asked quietly. He wants Jacob to know you, David said. He wants him to grow up knowing everyone who loved him, including the woman who saved him from a kidnapper, and the man who cared for him when his father couldn't. Saturday afternoon arrived bright and warm. I changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress and my grandmother's pearl necklace. David picked me up at 2 o'clock, looking nervous but hopeful. You okay, Mom? I think so, I said. It's just surreal meeting my grandson's real father as my grandson's real father. He smiled faintly. I know exactly what you mean. We drove to Riverside Park, where Carlos had suggested we meet. Neutral ground, he'd said. Somewhere comfortable for everyone. As we pulled into the parking lot, I spotted them immediately. Carlos Santos was pushing a stroller along the walking path, pointing out ducks to Jacob, chatting cheerfully in both English and Spanish, and even from a distance, I could see the love in every step he took. You could see the bond between father and son immediately, the way Jacob's head turned at the sound of his father's voice, the protective way Carlos hovered close to the stroller. There they are, David said. Unnecessarily, he looks like a good father, he does. We walked toward them slowly, giving Carlos time to notice us and collect himself. When he finally looked up and smiled, some of my nervousness eased. This was the same man who had thanked me through tears in that CPS office, who had listened so carefully as David shared months of memories about his son, Margaret. David. Carlos waved us over. Thank you for coming. Jacob had grown in the 3 weeks since I'd last seen him. His hair was a little longer, his cheeks fuller, and he sat upright in the stroller with new confidence. When he spotted David, he let out a happy babble and reached toward him with both arms. He remembers you, Carlos said softly as he lifted Jacob from the stroller and carried him over. David's face crumpled as Jacob grabbed his hair and patted his cheeks, squealing with delight. Hey, buddy, David whispered. Look how big you're getting. Then Carlos turned to me, and suddenly I was looking into the same blue eyes I'd fallen in love with 6 months earlier. Hi, Jacob, I said gently. Do you remember Grandma Margaret? He studied me for a moment, then smiled and reached straight for my pearl necklace, just like he had at the baptism. My heart broke and healed at the same time. We spent 2 hours in the park. Carlos told us about Jacob's life in San Diego, his job as a civil engineer, his family, the daycare Jacob would attend when he returned to work. He showed us pictures of Jacob's room, his cousins, the little life he was building for him. In return, we shared stories from Jacob's time with us, the night he first slept through until morning, the way he giggled during diaper changes, how he'd learned to grab his toes and put everything in his mouth. I want him to know these stories when he's older, Carlos said. I want him to understand that even though his first months were complicated, he was surrounded by people who loved him. As the afternoon went on, something unexpected happened. We stopped feeling like strangers brought together by tragedy and became something else, an unusual, imperfect, but genuine extended family. As we prepared to leave, I hesitated, then spoke. Carlos, would you mind if I stayed in touch? Birthday cards, Christmas presents, maybe, he smiled. Margaret, I was hoping you'd ask. Jacob doesn't have grandparents on my side anymore. They passed away before he was born. But he does have a grandmother who loved him enough to save him. And I want him to know that as he grows up. David cleared his throat. And Carlos, if you ever need anything, babysitting when you're in town, or just someone to talk to who understands what it's like to love that little guy, please call. I will, Carlos said. Then he added quietly, Vanessa stole from both of us. She stole your time with someone who would have been your son. And she stole my time with my actual son. But she didn't steal the love. That was real even if the circumstances weren't. The drive home was quiet. We were both processing the emotional weight of the afternoon. Mom, David finally said. I know this is strange, but I feel better. Not healed, but better. Me too, I said. Carlos is a good man. Yes, he is. Jacob's lucky, I continued. Lucky to have him as a real father and lucky to have had you as a stand-in father. When he needed one. That evening, I called my sister Martha and told her about the park. She had been my rock through everything, never once saying I told you so. Even though she'd had her own doubts about Vanessa. So you're staying in Jacob's life? She asked. It looks that way, and David's okay with that? More than okay. I think it helps him believe his love for Jacob wasn't wasted. And Vanessa? She asked. When's the trial? Next month. Carlos will testify. So will David. The federal prosecutor thinks she'll plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence. Good. Martha said. She deserves whatever she gets. I agreed, but truthfully, I'd stopped thinking about Vanessa weeks earlier. My focus had shifted to rebuilding what she'd tried to destroy: trust, family, love that wasn't built on lies. That night, as I got ready for bed, my eyes fell on the silver baby cup I'd bought for Jacob's baptism, the one engraved with his initials and the date. I'd never given it to him. In all the chaos, I'd completely forgotten about it. Tomorrow, I decided, I would wrap it carefully and send it to Carlos with a note explaining what it meant. Jacob might not understand now, but one day he would be old enough to hear the story of his complicated beginning, and the grandmother who loved him enough to tell the truth. I placed the cup on my nightstand where I'd see it when I woke up. A quiet reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is also the hardest thing you can imagine. Outside my window, the moon was bright and full, casting long shadows across the garden Robert and I had planted together 20 years earlier. Everything looked calm, normal, exactly the way it should be, but I knew better now. Appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. Love sometimes required courage more than comfort. And family wasn't defined by blood, marriage certificates, or baptism ceremonies. Family meant showing up, telling the truth, protecting the people you love even when they can't see that they need protecting, especially then. Margaret's story, Chapter 10. 2 months after that afternoon in the park, I believed the worst was finally behind us. Vanessa was in federal custody awaiting trial. David was rebuilding his life through therapy. And Carlos had become part of our extended family. I should have known better. Stories like ours don't end so neatly. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, David's therapist, had never contacted me directly before. Mrs. Thompson, David has given me permission to reach out to you. Something has come to light that you need to know. Can you come to my office this afternoon? You may want to bring someone with you for support. When we were seated in her office, Dr. Martinez got straight to the point. Mrs. Thompson, in working with David, we've uncovered something deeply disturbing. Vanessa Santos isn't just a bigamist and a kidnapper. She's what we classify as a professional predator. David wasn't her first victim. She opened a thick file. We've identified for other men across 3 different states who were targeted using the same methods. Different names, different backgrounds. But the pattern is identical. What pattern? I asked, my chest tightening. She targets recently divorced or widowed men with stable incomes. She creates false identities, studies them for weeks, sometimes months, and then engineers what appear to be accidental encounters. My stomach went cold. So David wasn't random. No, Dr. Martinez said gently. Vanessa had been watching David for months before they met at that coffee shop. She knew about his divorce, his job, his finances, and even his relationship with you. Her expression grew grave. 2 of the victims lost significant amounts of money but survived. One died under suspicious circumstances. A man named Thomas Mitchell from Phoenix. His mother, Eleanor, became suspicious and was found dead 3 days later. Apparent heart attack. The room seemed to tilt. She kills people who threaten her schemes. I whispered, it appears that way. Dr. Martinez looked directly at me. Mrs. Thompson, it's very possible that you saved not just Jacob, but David's life and quite possibly your own. I thought about the months when Vanessa had resented my presence, my questions, my refusal to disappear from David's life. How many times had she looked at me and wondered whether I was becoming a problem that needed to be removed? There's more, Dr. Martinez said. The FBI believes Vanessa is part of a larger organization. The level of identity fabrication, background research, and coordination involved suggests resources far beyond what one person could manage alone. You're saying there are others like her? I asked. Yes. The FBI has been tracking what they call romance fraud networks for years. Professional criminals who target vulnerable people, steal their assets, and vanish. But Vanessa's methods were far more sophisticated than most. Martha spoke for the first time. What does this mean for David, for the trial? It means David was victimized by someone far more dangerous and calculating than we initially understood. And it means the federal charges against Vanessa will likely be far more serious than originally anticipated. That evening, David and I sat together in my living room as I shared everything Dr. Martinez had told us. He listened in stunned silence, asking a question now and then, but mostly just trying to absorb the scale of how completely he'd been manipulated for other men. He said finally, and one of them might be dead because his mother got suspicious. David, I said softly, you can't blame yourself for not seeing through something this elaborate. She was a professional criminal with years of experience. He looked at me, his voice breaking. But Mom, don't you understand? She was planning to kill you. If you hadn't discovered the truth about Jacob, if you hadn't made those phone calls. His words dissolved into silence. I could have lost everything that truly mattered while defending someone who was quietly planning to murder my mother. We sat there in silence for a long time, both of us absorbing the terrifying alternate reality we had narrowly escaped. Finally, David spoke again. There's something I haven't told you, he said. Something I was too ashamed to admit, even to Dr. Martinez until this week. I waited. I could tell this was important. Do you remember how Vanessa always had explanations for her expensive clothes and jewelry? How she said her previous job had paid extremely well? Yes, and how she always knew exactly what to say whenever you or Martha raised concerns. How she could make me feel calm, reassured, confident no matter what was being questioned. I remember. David's hands were trembling now. Last month, while I was packing up her things for the police, I found something in the garage. A notebook, hidden in a box behind old Christmas decorations. He pulled out a small leather-bound journal and placed it on the coffee table between us. She kept notes. Mom, detailed notes about me, about you, about our family. She tracked my schedule, my finances, my emotional triggers. She documented our arguments, our conversations, even our intimate moments. I stared at the journal like it was a poisonous snake. She was studying you the way a scientist studies a lab rat. Look at this, he said, opening it to a page marked with a ribbon. This entry is from 2 months after we started dating. David responds well to subtle criticism of his mother's interference, suggesting Margaret doesn't trust his judgment creates immediate defensive loyalty, used sparingly to avoid detection. The clinical coldness of it made me feel sick. And this one, he continued, flipping pages, from last Christmas, Margaret suspicious of jewelry gifts. Need to establish stronger wedge between D and mother. Consider pregnancy announcement to create permanent family obligation. She was planning to fake a pregnancy, I whispered. She was planning everything, David said. Every fight between us. Every doubt you had. Every time I chose her over you, it was all calculated. Manipulation based on a psychological profile she built of our family. I thought about all the moments I'd questioned myself. All the times I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive, too protective, too suspicious. David, I said softly, she was a professional. You couldn't have known, but you did, he replied. Your instincts told you something was wrong from the very beginning. And instead of trusting the woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally my entire life, I trusted someone who was literally taking notes on how to control me better. That's when the last piece finally fell into place. David, I said slowly, she didn't just target you randomly. She targeted our family because of me. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? Think about it. A widow with a close relationship to her adult son. Significant assets from Robert's life insurance. Protective by nature. I was the real threat to her long-term plans, the one person most likely to see through her act. So pushing you out wasn't just about money, he said quietly. It was about removing the one person who could expose her. Exactly. And suddenly, everything made sense. When throwing me out of the baptism didn't work, I said. When I didn't retreat and disappear the way she expected. I paused as the realization hit us both. She would have had to escalate to something permanent. The journal lay between us, silent evidence of a nightmare we'd barely survived. And as I looked at my son, I understood something deeply unsettling and profoundly true. In trying to save Jacob, I had unknowingly saved us all. 3 weeks before Vanessa's trial, FBI agent Patricia Morrow came to see me. She was about David's age, with sharp eyes and a calm, steady authority. Mrs. Thompson, she said, I'm investigating what we call Operation False Promise, the romance fraud network Vanessa was part of. For 2 hours, Agent Morrow asked me about every interaction I'd ever had with Vanessa. Her casual questions about money, her interest in my health and daily routines, the way she gathered information about our family. She was profiling you, Agent Morrow confirmed, building a psychological portrait to neutralize you as a threat. She pulled out her tablet and showed me photographs. We've identified 6 victims across 4 states. Robert Chen from Seattle, $40,000 lost. Marcus Williams from Denver, $200,000. And Thomas Mitchell from Phoenix. My breath caught. The man who died, she continued. His mother, Eleanor, hired a private investigator just like you did. 3 days before the report was completed, Eleanor suffered what appeared to be a heart attack. I stared at Eleanor's photograph, silver hair, intelligent eyes. A mother who loved her son enough to ask dangerous questions. She looked like me. How did she die? I asked. Officially, a heart attack, Agent Morrow said. But Eleanor was found with tea that tested positive for chemicals known to trigger cardiac episodes in elderly people. My blood turned cold. She was poisoned. We exhumed her body last month. Agent Morrow continued. There was enough evidence to confirm that Eleanor Mitchell was murdered. She turned her tablet toward me, displaying an organizational chart filled with dozens of photographs. The group operates like a business, she explained. They have researchers who identify targets, infiltrators like Vanessa, support teams who create false identities, and cleanup specialists. Cleanup specialists? I repeated. People who eliminate threats, she said evenly. People like Eleanor Mitchell. I stared at the chart, trying to process the scope of the criminal empire we had stumbled into. How many victims? I asked. 37 confirmed cases over the past 5 years, Agent Morrow said. And we believe that's only a fraction of their actual activity. She looked at me carefully. And now we have something. They didn't anticipate a living witness who uncovered their operation before it was complete. Your testimony gives us our best chance of dismantling the entire network. That evening, David and I sat at my kitchen table, trying to absorb everything Agent Morrow had told us. The sheer scale of the organization was staggering. and the realization that I had likely been marked for elimination was still settling into my bones. "Mom," David said quietly, "there's something I've been thinking about ever since we found Vanessa's journal." "What is it?" "Do you remember the night you fell in your bathroom?" "About 2 months before the baptism, I did. I'd slipped on what I thought was a wet patch on the tile floor and bruised my ribs badly enough that I'd nearly gone to the emergency room. Vanessa insisted on coming over that night." He continued. "She brought soup. She stayed for 2 hours. She cleaned your bathroom top to bottom and kept checking on you." "I remember," I said. "I thought it was very kind." David's expression hardened. "I don't think it was kindness. I think she was testing something, seeing how you'd react to a staged accident, how serious the injury might be, whether anyone would question it if something worse happened." The soup, the meticulous cleaning, the way she'd ask detailed questions about my symptoms and how long recovery would take. "She was rehearsing," I said, the truth hitting me like ice water. "That fall wasn't an accident." David said. "I think she created the wet spot, waited to see if you'd fall, and then positioned herself as the devoted daughter-in-law who rushed in to help. If I'd been seriously injured," I said slowly, "she could have escalated, and if you died," he finished, "she would have been the grieving family member who tried so hard to take care of you. No one would have questioned it, and she would have removed the biggest threat to her long-term plans." We sat in stunned silence, realizing just how close I'd come to becoming another Eleanor Mitchell, another suspicious mother silenced permanently. "David," I said at last, "tomorrow I'm calling Agent Morrow back. They need to investigate that bathroom incident." "What if there are other times we haven't thought of?" he asked. "Other moments when she might have been testing ways to hurt you?" I thought about every family dinner, every time Vanessa insisted on helping in the kitchen, every moment she'd shown unusual concern for my health. "Then we remember all of them," I said. "Every single one. And we helped the FBI put these people away for the rest of their lives." That night, as I locked my doors and armed the alarm system David had insisted on installing, I understood something clearly. Uncovering Vanessa's true identity had only been the beginning. We hadn't just exposed a marriage scam. We'd walked straight into the center of a criminal conspiracy that had already destroyed dozens of lives. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt purpose. Eleanor Mitchell had died asking the right questions, only too late. Thomas Mitchell had lost his mother because she'd come too close to the truth. Not this time. This time, we were going to be the ones who brought them down. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a cold Tuesday in November, when Vanessa was led into the courtroom wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller without her designer clothes. But when our eyes met, I saw the same cold calculation, as if she were still trying to work the angles. David sat beside me, his jaw clenched tight, when the prosecutor asked for her plea to charges of kidnapping, bigamy, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Vanessa's voice was flat and controlled. "Not guilty to all charges." Her defense attorney had been hired by Serious Money, proof of just how organized this network truly was. Then the bombshell landed. The government calls Mrs. Elena Rodriguez to the stand. A woman in her 70s slowly made her way to the witness stand, leaning heavily on a walker. Her face looked hollow, her eyes distant and traumatized, like someone who had survived something she still couldn't fully name. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the prosecutor said gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." "She was my daughter-in-law," the woman said, her voice trembling. "She was married to my son, Miguel, for 6 years." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. "When was the last time you saw your son, Miguel?" 14 months ago, she said quietly. "Before the accident?" "Can you describe the accident?" Mrs. Rodriguez broke down, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "Miguel fell down the stairs while carrying laundry. The steps were slippery. Vanessa was there. She called the ambulance. She seemed so worried, so frightened." "And what happened to Miguel?" "He died from head trauma," she said. "The doctor said the fall was very unlucky." David reached for my hand. "This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was murder after Miguel's death," the prosecutor continued. "What happened to his estate?" "Vanessa inherited everything," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Almost $300,000. 2 weeks after the funeral, she took the money and disappeared." During the recess, Agent Morrow found us in the hallway. "We found Vanessa's journal about Miguel, too," she said quietly. "Notes about his schedule, his insurance policies, his physical routines. She studied him the same way she studied David, with one difference." She paused. "In Miguel's case, she completed the plan." When court resumed, forensic pathologist Dr. Harold Brennan testified that Miguel's injuries indicated he had been struck before falling. His death, he concluded, was a staged murder. As we left the courthouse, David spoke softly. His voice hollow. The night before the baptism, he said, Vanessa suggested I increase my life insurance policy. Have $1 million. She already had the paperwork filled out. He swallowed hard. If you hadn't made those phone calls, I would have signed it. And within months, I probably would have had an unlucky accident that night. I realized we still didn't understand the full scope of what we had uncovered. Other families were being targeted. Other elderly parents who asked questions were being quietly marked for elimination, and I made a decision that would change my life. I wasn't just going to testify against Vanessa. I was going to help the FBI bring down the entire network. Some fights are worth the risk even when the enemy is more dangerous than you ever imagined. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday in December, 3 days before Vanessa's trial. Nothing good ever happens at that hour, Mrs. Thompson. Agent Merrow's voice was urgent. Stay calm. We're sending security to your house immediately. Vanessa Santos escaped federal custody 6 hours ago. I was wide awake now. How? I asked. The transport van was ambushed by 3 individuals using military-grade weapons. 2 federal marshals are in critical condition. This was a professional extraction. My stomach dropped. The family has decided you're too dangerous to leave alive. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of an armored SUV, watching my house disappear into the darkness. Agent Morrow sat beside me, coordinating the manhunt. We're taking you to a secure safe house in Virginia, she said. You'll remain there until Santos is recaptured. What about David? Carlos, Jacob? All in protective custody. As we drove, Agent Morrow explained what they'd learned. Someone with inside access provided the transport details. We're investigating federal employees, court staff, anyone who could have leaked that information. The safe house was a nondescript ranch surrounded by woods and guarded by federal agents. Once inside, Agent Morrow didn't sugarcoat the situation. Vanessa isn't just an escaped prisoner. She's a professional assassin, and her entire network is threatened by your testimony. How long will this take? I asked. We're deploying every resource we have. But I need to be honest with you. She hesitated. We found something in her cell. A detailed floor plan of your house. Your security codes. Your daily routines. She was planning to come after me even before the escape, and there's more. Agent Morrow said. We found correspondence with someone referred to only as the architect. This person directs operations, and they've determined your existence poses an unacceptable risk. So this isn't revenge. I said slowly, no, this is containment. Eliminating you is just the first step. They intend to systematically remove everyone connected: David, Carlos, other victims. What if I testify remotely? I asked. The defense would challenge it, she said. Without in-person testimony, we may lose the strongest charges. And if you don't testify, Vanessa walks free. The network continues, more families destroyed, more people killed. I thought of Eleanor Mitchell, Miguel Rodriguez, all the victims whose lives were shattered by professional predators. Agent Morrow opened her laptop. There's something else, she said. Something that changes everything. She turned the screen toward me. Vanessa Santos isn't just a member of the family. Based on financial records, we believe she's one of its founding leaders. I stared at the screen. What does that mean? She wasn't following orders, Agent Morrow said. She was giving them. The records revealed a criminal empire far more sophisticated than we'd imagined. The family operated like a corporation: departments for recruitment, research, execution, cleanup, money laundering, and legal protection. Vanessa ran the romance infiltration division, overseeing dozens of operatives. How many victims? I asked. Agent Morrow didn't hesitate. Conservatively, over 200 confirmed cases in 5 years. The real number of victims could be far higher. That night, I called David at his safe house. Mom, are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, I said, but I need to tell you something. I'm going to testify in person, no matter the risks. Mom, no, he whispered. These people, they killed to protect themselves. They're going to kill anyway. Other families, other innocents. The only way this ends, I said firmly, is if we stop them completely. But what if something happens to you? Then at least I'll die knowing I fought back, I said. The next morning, I told Agent Morrow my decision. Margaret, are you certain? She asked. Once decided, there's no going back. I'm certain. But Agent Morrow, I want something in return. What's that? I want to know who the architect is. I want to look in the face of the person who ordered my death. She smiled grimly. If everything goes according to plan, you'll have that chance sooner than you think. The courtroom was under lockdown, tighter than most prisons. Federal agents lined the walls. Snipers occupied rooftops. Everyone screamed 3 times for security. Despite the layers of protection, I felt strangely calm walking to the witness stand. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table in a bulletproof vest, shackled. She'd been recaptured 2 days earlier at a private airfield. But it was the person in the gallery who made my heart race. An elderly man with silver hair, kind eyes, and an expensive suit. Distinguished, calm, but cold calculation hardened his expression when he looked at me. Agent Morrow whispered, "The architect, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, retired psychology professor. He's been running the family for 8 years, for 3 hours." I told our story, the baptism, the humiliation, the phone calls that changed everything, the discovery of Jacob's true identity, Vanessa's arrest, and the revelation that we'd stumbled into something far more sinister. During cross-examination, defense attorney Reed made his fatal mistake. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "isn't it true you hired a private investigator because you were jealous of their happiness?" "No," I said. He smiled smugly and pulled out medical records. "These show prescriptions for anti-anxiety medication in your name for 2 years." I looked at the papers, my heart racing. "Those prescriptions were never filled by me. Are you saying these are falsified?" "No," I said, looking straight at Vanessa. "I'm saying someone used my identity to obtain these medications without my knowledge. Someone who had access to my personal information. Someone who studied my routine and had opportunities to steal my identity. Because if I had died suspiciously, these records would suggest I was mentally unstable, possibly suicidal. Perfect cover for my murder." The courtroom buzzed. The revelation hit like an explosion. Vanessa hadn't just planned to kill me. She'd spent months creating a false medical history to cover her tracks. Agent Morrow took the stand next and presented evidence from Dr. Blackwood's arrest. Among it was an operations manual with profiles of targets, financial records, and what he called the final solution protocol. "Can you explain this protocol?" asked the prosecutor. Dr. Blackwood's plan, Agent Morrow explained, was to eliminate all witnesses threatening the family. "I was target number 1 on a list of 17 marked for assassination." The scope was staggering. The protocol included detailed assassination plans designed to look accidental. Most disturbing, though, was the long-term plan, expanding globally, franchising these methods to other organizations worldwide. During recess, Dr. Blackwood approached me in the hallway. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "you've been a most formidable adversary. You ordered my death." I said calmly, "Not my adversary." He snapped. "Just another criminal who thought he was smarter than he was." His mask slipped, revealing rage. "You have no idea what you've destroyed. The family represents order and efficiency. What you call justice, I call murder." "This isn't order," I said. "It's organized cruelty. And this isn't over. There are others. You may have won a battle, but the war continues. Then they'll have to get through me," I added. "And every person brave enough to fight back. I'm not afraid of you anymore." 3 weeks later, guilty verdicts came down on all counts. Life sentences without parole for both Vanessa and Dr. Blackwood. 6 months later, I sat in Carlos's San Diego backyard, watching Jacob take his first steps toward his father's arms. David was there, along with 3 other families whose lives had been destroyed by the family. "Now rebuilding, Margaret," Carlos said, lifting the giggling boy. "I still don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," I said. "Just live a good life and make sure he knows that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing." That evening, David and I walked along the beach. "Mom," he said quietly, "Dr. Martinez says you probably saved hundreds of lives by testifying. Maybe thousands, if Blackwood's expansion plans had succeeded." "I didn't do it to be a hero," I said. "I did it because it was right." "That's what makes you a hero," he said. We walked in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Pacific. "Mom, what you said to Dr. Blackwood about not being afraid anymore, did you mean it?" I nodded. "For most of my life, I was afraid of making waves, causing trouble, being difficult. Afraid that if I spoke up, people would stop loving me. But now I know something important. The people worth loving will love you even more for standing up to evil. And the people who stop loving you for doing the right thing, they weren't really family to begin with." As we turned back toward Jacob's laughter ringing across the yard, I realized my story had come full circle. It had started with humiliation that felt like the world's end and ended with a victory that literally saved lives. But the most important thing wasn't the criminals caught or the crimes prevented. The most important thing was rediscovering something I'd lost. The knowledge that a grandmother's love backed by fierce determination and uncompromising courage could move mountains and topple empires. Sometimes, making just one phone call at exactly the right moment changes everything. The woman who had been told to leave her grandson's baptism had found her voice, her strength, and her true family. And she had learned that being underestimated by your enemies is the greatest advantage of all.